My name is Kathy Velikov. I am an assistant professor here at the University of Michigan. And at the end of this group of speakers, we're going to try to have a kind of productive conversation around a topic called the nature of technology. And I'm going to start out with two quotes. One from the middle of the century from philosopher of technology Martin Heidegger, who said, "Instrumentality is considered to be the fundamental characteristic of technology." And certainly over the last 2 days, we've seen a number of examples of the instrumentality of technology. More recently, Donna Haraway, a philosopher in The Posthuman and writer in Simians, Cyborgs, and Women, The Reinvention of Nature, wrote, "Late 20th century machines have made thoroughly ambiguous the difference between natural and artificial, mind and body, self-developing and externally designed, and many other distinctions that used to apply to organisms and machines. Our machines are disturbingly lively, and we ourselves are frighteningly inert." So the nature of this conversation on the nature of technology asks, should we characterize the relationship between nature and technology as a seamless and reciprocal choreography between new possibilities for knowledge and the material resistance of the world upon which they act? Or is this relationship primarily one of conflict, in which acts of technological prowess are imposed upon an unsuspecting nature, or in which capricious nature takes its vengeful toll upon man's most complex instruments? If, as Martin Heidegger argues, instrumentality is the fundamental characteristic of technology, then where do we draw the line between utilizing our tools to their best capacity and exploiting and instrumentalizing the world in which we live? So within the discipline of architecture, approaches encompassing biomimicry, morphology, subnature, atmospheres, environments, ecologies, and genetic algorithms have emerged as spatial and procedural catalysts that intentionally blur the long-held distinctions between nature and technology. And as emerging paradigms, these call in disciplinary boundaries and proprieties into question, the traditional disciplinary boundaries, while fostering a mutually constitutive relationship between nature and technology. So the first question that I'd like the panel to kind of start to think about is if we might start with the prototypical 19th century image of the machine in the garden, and as the characteristic of the late 19th, early 20th century discourses between nature and technology, and then jump forward to some of the ecological and technological paradigms of today, those of that realize cybernetic processes as the self-same ones of nature itself, as well as the ecological paradigms that expose the garden and its structures and processes as a machine, perhaps, suggesting that the mere juxtaposition of nature and technology is no longer productive discourse to have within architecture. And I would like to ask from the panel how they respond to this, and if they could propose more productive ways that we could approach the ongoing dialogue between nature and technology.
Okay, I promise I stay quiet for 4 minutes.
Okay, so someone else has to start.
I'm living up to my word. It's my carbon footprint.
Should I take this one?
Sure. Why don't you start?
Okay, so nature and technology, just even to start with that as a comment, I think, to kind of start, there's an issue of as if somehow our nature and technology are somehow apart, and somehow they're not completely interwoven, and the fact that you could even call something natural, I think, is a whole other issue. But if you could take technology, and this maybe has an issue with, I think it comes up with sustainability or preservation, and maybe just another question would be, because there are people out there who are looking to do this, would be through technology, if you could somehow bring back the prairie of the Midwest, or you could somehow reenact and bring back the woolly mammoth to live in Siberia, is that what we should be doing? And I think pretty quickly people say, no, they were phased out, that doesn't exist anymore, we've moved on. So the next logical question for me would be, why are we preserving? Or what's the need to preserve and hold on so tightly to what we have today? Why are we not thinking equally, where does this lead us 50 years from now, or 100 years? Why, so at the same way, I think it'd be too easy to say that just the dichotomy of technology and nature is just thin together, but at the same time, just through that kind of quick thought of approach between what we're doing and, the quote in the beginning of the day, I think, said it all. That, the earth is not at risk, we are. Like, that's it. I mean, I don't think you have to worry too much about anything else. So our role within it surely is on the table, but whether or not what we have out there today, and I'm obviously linking this back to my work to some regards, is that, I'm much more interested in speculating what the opportunities could be in the future than I am in preserving what they are at the moment, right or wrong.
I think maybe I can also add a few things. I think one is the title of the topic I actually understood more as the nature of technology, in the sense not so much juxtaposing nature and technology as two sort of separate things, but actually talking more about the characteristic of technology, or how we perceive it as something to be desirable or to be condemned, or that fails, or that is a perpetual source of optimism. But on the other hand, if one juxtaposes it, I think it's important to still also understand nature as technology in a much more complex and much longer time frame. It is an optimization process or a competition between basically many elements in a much far larger scale than we could ever possibly reach as makers, so to say. So I think that also speaks to a lot of the terminology that's been thrown around, from the genetic algorithm to sort of biomimicry, etc., which is, I think, basically just confirming that more than anything. And I think those who are doing it honestly, not in a moral sense, but who are actually looking at it at depth, will acknowledge that it's really, if at all, a metaphoric sort of or inspirational activity, but in no way actually coming close to imitate or to compete or to replace natural processes in their complexity. But nonetheless, I think in that juxtaposition, one can learn things from it, and also develop a critical stance, so to say, of what one is actually doing and able to do.
Yeah, I would certainly reaffirm something Alex said, that it's not about setting up a dialectical opposition between nature and technology, but if in fact you place it back into the nature of technology, it seems to me you're talking about a whole series of arenas within which serious games are played. Some of them that we regulate, we understand well. Many of them are unpredictable and unfamiliar. And I suppose this is an interesting panel, because Vernon is certainly coming from another place, which I respect, but in juxtaposition to many of the authors at the table, a lot of the research still is contained within a certain set of playing fields that have not emerged yet to their full potential. And I actually think that both ends of the discipline and profession need to participate in a far more integrated and rigorous and opportunistic conversation. I'm talking about practitioners and corporations that either are proponents of tall buildings in Shanghai or the Middle East, or those that reside in research laboratories anywhere in the world that are looking at a computational or a microbial level at new forms of behavior that have enormous amount of potentiality. I certainly think that the charge that we're faced with at this moment in history and I'm talking about the depletion of energy resources and certain kinds of ecological threats, shouldn't be seen as a problem, but as an opportunity to kind of reassess our role within the profession and our relation to a series of sister areas of inquiry. And I'm talking about the building industry, I'm talking about material science, I'm talking about people who make policy, who oversee urbanism, and that there should be new coalitions that are created in order to harness the full potential of architecture to do something profound. I think it's going to take an enormous amount of risk, although we may be the point of departure in terms of a kind of engine of speculation, but it's going to take an enormous amount of risk on the part of the partners to recognize that there is the potential for an economic engine to sustain this kind of novelty, and I would say a kind of revolution, and I'm talking about the next generation of building components. I think that has to, on all levels, be a mandate, and although some of the work here may move in and out of certain materials, what they all share is behavior and an appreciation of a world that is constantly in flux and is undergoing, I think Anna Dyson spoke today when she spoke about mutation. It's not evolution, but she highlighted that term. The fact that it's constantly undergoing change, and to what extent in all of our practices at any scale does it accommodate for that level of suppleness, variation, and a kind of targeted implication in the world at large.
I just want to respond to say, first off, I agree with just about everything you just said. I've had several thoughts coming this weekend about how, I think one of the issues with trying to push this issue of sustainability into a kind of a broader and more all-inclusive realm is it kind of goes back to building constituencies. I think part of what I was trying to say in my talk is that these small-scale buildings that seem to be supported by community institutions really are trying to demonstrate values in the sense to have kind of an educational purpose to their communities, to kind of build that ethic, encourage those values. And one of the comments that was made, and I forget specifically what the topic was earlier, but someone was talking about how we get people that you can't actually convince. Don't set yourself up to have to convince people to adopt new technologies. Sort of give them the tools and let them discover and develop them on their own. And I think as far as sustainability goes, it's one of the areas where social networking can have a tremendous effect. That if that becomes part of the conversation over social networks, and people begin to understand and encourage those values among each other, it's not like they're being told from on high, yes, sustainability is a good thing. Yes, you have to do more than put the right light bulbs in your fixtures. It's sort of the reverse approach to the Al Gore movie, where he really tries to convince everybody, this is the case. This is why we all should believe in sustainability. I think in many cases, social networking, digital technology, it kind of allows those values to rise up from the grassroots, and it'll be interesting to see if that movement gains momentum through broader conversations.
For me, it's a bit hard to kind of take position into the discussion with that, because most of the work we're doing is a pure experiment. And when you do an experiment, you do have to abstract a lot of constraint, and we are far from being into the outside world yet. So it's kind of a bit hard, but there is something in the discussion maybe I'd like to add is I'm a designer at least, and I'm definitely not a developer of technology. I'm there somehow to kind of hijack what's there and kind of twist it to hopefully find some kind of new form is one way, but to find some kind of innovation, but in terms of design, and I don't think yet we develop any, like, I'm always very skeptical when I see people looking at technology or nature and coming back and say, okay, the building should be doing that because we see that in nature. We are generalists. We have no idea about those type of things. And I think I rather look at people who has already filtered the information. For example, in my field, I would rather look at a computer scientist who has extract some kind of algorithm out of an observation, a precise observation of nature, rather than a generic comments. I find often those sustainability things very much like commercial arguments for that, but that's super polemic. I shouldn't say that on the table.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, being in, I don't know how many of these kind of symposiums, I'm going to do one of the most common practices, which is basically I'm not going to answer your question, and I'm going to talk about something else, and I want to talk about it that it looks more or less they have to do with your question. But a couple of things that I was thinking during the day and on the plane is architecture, as far as I can think, is the only discipline that does these kind of things. Like if you hang around with musicians or filmmakers or artists for that matter, they are not thinking, okay, what is the nature of technology? Where are we going with technology? What is the future of technology? What does it mean for a discipline? They just do it. And they have like a very natural progression of things, and it's absorbed and it gets incorporated in the discourse and allowed us to interact. And I'll say this with all due respect for all kind of tendencies and natures of work and so on. I find it kind of a little bit disingenuous and dangerous when we start to mix things that really belong to different territories because they share common technology. Because the truth is, the platform that everybody in this table, but Nike or Apple or Toyota or you name it, the platform operations are the same. That doesn't mean that the problems are the same and the intentions are the same and the ambitions are the same. And I think that the nature of discipline, which is be a generalist, and that's what I was saying earlier in my presentation, that to me one of the most interesting things is the misinformation and misunderstanding about how we do these things. Like, I'm pretty sure if you talk to a mathematician, he will be horrified at what you do with the, you know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure if I talk with a filmmaker, he will be horrified the way that we do whatever we do. And I think that to me is one of the, is the weakness and the strength of the discipline as such. So I always, and I'm not lying about this. I always, all these kind of questions, so on, I only think when I'm in context like this and somebody asks me, in my natural progression of things are much more seamless. It just work is what is available. You operate within that. I always remember interviews to Keith Richards, and he kept telling how every 5 years the music industry will completely change the technology and how they need to learn the latest thing and so on. But they never made a big deal about it. I mean, there's never like a, and again, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying there is something that I think we tend to overestimate our own value as a field, and I think more than ever, I would advocate for still a strong distinction between the profession and the discipline. And I think there is an anxiety to mix the profession and discipline more often than not right now, that in the long run I think is incredibly damaging, and I think, and we mark on this, and I don't have any problem raising the polemic. I think some of the issues of sustainability, don't get me wrong, I think it's a gigantic and enormous problem, and I think architecture should do it and so on. But I think it's giving cover for an incredible amount of crap that is getting done in that name. And again, I'm not, actually that tower in Gensler, I kind of like it. I mean, it's pretty, it wouldn't say it's one of those, but I'm very concerned about this kind of almost ethical dilemma about technology. It reminds me, like, it seems like Evan was mentioning revolution, and the main problem with revolution is when you start to analyze it every 6 months. I mean, the Soviets did that, we'll see how they go, and so on and so forth. So if the revolution needs to be alone, I think we should leave it alone and see where it goes, and don't try to domesticate it all the time. Again, probably have nothing to do with your question, but It's Saturday afternoon, and the game is probably over, so.
Well, in that case, I'm just going to ask a very short question, and because and being the last panel or the last conversation, we can. It would be interesting to hear from the people on the table. Is there a conversation that you think we should be having that we haven't had in the last 2 days concerning technology and design?
Well, I do want to follow up on something, a couple of things Hernan said. The language that we privilege to frame kind of priority discourses certainly comes with a bias, even if it's highly general. My sense of what Hernan's speaking to, the question of sustainability and the term of sustainability is problematic. We often, for example, construct these taxonomic boxes. It was interesting. I forget the name of the speaker yesterday, who is a landscape architect, who her entire discourse was about taxonomy. And it's interesting that some of these kinds of taxonomic headings are inherited. Some of them we construct, yet often we do not step back objectively and reassess them. So the term technology is so sufficiently broad that it seems to me it required effort on the part of many of us to find a level of specificity by which a second frame allowed us to enter into it. And if we don't do that, it somehow imposes a kind of umbrella, and there are certain associations that might be made that are problematic. The reason why I agree with part of what Hernan is saying about sustainability is that there is a kind of propaganda that has been disseminated and it's been institutionalized from political apparatuses into all the disciplines, including architecture, which proposes that if you can, in quotes, save the planet first, you're going to get great architecture. And the answer is you're not. In other words, if you can prove that you've resolved the carbon footprint, then in certain competitions in the world, you may win, and you may acquire the capital that allows you to put these buildings up into the vertical axes towards the heavens. And they could be downright awful pieces of architecture, and that's seriously problematic. So it is important that we don't, as a discipline, allow the challenges of the ecology and the depletion of energy resources somehow kidnap a larger, I think, promise to the world that architecture has to continually enable the imagination to emerge and to speculate and to create things that may be familiar or exotic and novel on the highest level. That inevitably, and this is the beauty of our discipline, that unlike certain mediums that have a kind of one-to-one relation to the material world like painting and sculpture, architecture continually goes through these beautiful translative leaps within different, I would say, ecology of assessment, and I'm talking now about the kind of collaborative arenas that we're constantly engaged in order to move it into the built environment. Inevitably, it will have to reconcile a series of considerations, and I'm talking about, beautiful work, beautiful ideas, so that it's able to sustain on a variety of levels. The last question that you asked, Kathy, what other things should we be talking about? We should always remember that it's not the tool, it's the author. We should always remember that it's about the intentionality behind a project. We should always remember that academia is an incredible arena that needs to be protected at all costs. in order to enable the next generation of students to engender the world with something profoundly beautiful at any scale. And the machines and the techniques that we're engaged in are certainly important and have to be addressed continually as participants in this process, but they themselves are not the thing, and they certainly shouldn't drive the outcome.
In relation to your question about what we should be talking, I mean, Julian this morning mentioned John Underkoffler, who runs Oblong's industry in Los Angeles, which are the guy who came with the concept of the physical interface and minority report, and they're pushing way forward. And I'm fascinated by his work because he have like a whole philosophical implication. It's not just commerce. Because one thing which it happens in the last year or so, like the iPad, I'm absolutely disturbed by that because it's basically, it's like technology is going backwards. It's like we have the most amazing technology and it's limiting and it's giving you a fixed menu about what you can do with it. And those are saying are the new computers and the new piece, whatever we want to call it. And I think part of the risk is I think some of this conversation and some of the work that is produced in schools all over the world and experimental work is suffering a little bit from an iPad syndrome, like it's becoming too formulaic. It gets packaged in a very cool, interesting way, but also it reduces amounts of possibility. And I think, especially in a context like this, when we have an audience of the students, it's really important for them to keep challenge that condition that if it doesn't move forward, if it doesn't challenge the status quo of the condition and so on, it's not worth discussing it. And that's what I always think is discussing in terms of technology and future is always a little bit risky because it seems like we keep looking for the next slogans. And I think technology has got so sophisticated by now and to a point, but at the same time we're incredibly amateur at it. I mean, it's this kind of a dichotomy that I think it has an incredible level of individuality and have to do with this, and it has to do the relation with it and the ambitions. I always say the very stupid example, and I stay quiet for the rest of the thing, is there's no doubt that technology and techniques enhance certain ambitions and aesthetics and expression. And Jimi Hendrix couldn't do Voodoo Child without the wah-wah pedal. You know, the that one. With the Spanish guitars doesn't work. But I have a bunch of friends who have electric guitar and a wah-wah pedal, and trust me, they are not fucking Jimi Hendrix. So there is a correlation between of the apparatus and the ambitions of it, and I think that's what I think it cannot be codified, and we shouldn't try to codify it. Anyway, that's a longer discussion.
I wanted to also answer to the question, or add something to the question of what we should be talking about, or could be, I think, just very quickly, the why, in terms of why we actually address certain design problems, and then also interdisciplinarity has been discussed a lot, but I think rarely so far in the sense of whether the discipline one is in is actually the right one to answer that question, which is, I think, one of the largest crises in this sort of sustainability discussion, because I think often the right answer would be to not build or not build in this format. I mean, no matter how much you can improve on that format, maybe the right thing would to point to a different technology to solve that problem, which would actually move outside of one's own domain. And that, I think, would move basically the solution or the use of technology into a realm where you actually would work collaboratively on the conceptual design, not just on the implementation or problem solving of it. And I think, to me, that is one of the core challenges, because it's not bigger, better, faster, wider, but actually to step by.
You give me my excuse for my commercial strategy.
Exactly.
We don't build because we want to save the planet.
Perfect. Yeah.
No, because we don't have clients. That's so cool. I'm going to put it in my website. The greenest architecture firm in the world.
Yeah.
We never managed to build anything.
No, but I think it's beyond that, right? Because it could go the other way as well. So I think
you're absolutely right.
To break out of the sort of the notion that one has to solve the problem one is given. So.
With that, I'm going to close the discussion because we're at the end of our time. Before anyone gets up, please stay for the closing comments. I'd like to thank the speakers for an engaging discussion and as well as very engaging presentations.